so they don't have to twist their necks, and so have them come up one by one, and then when we're in the question and answer session, we'll have all the presenters come up and speak. So I'd like to first present Federico Teijeiro.
Yes.
Casi brasileiro. Yeah, almost a Brazilian name, who is presenting the dark side of the Youth Olympic Games in Buenos Aires. And every presenter will have 10 minutes and open your presentation.
Hi. Last November, with the Olympic torch of Buenos Aires to warm, we conducted an investigation entitled the Million Club List, in which it was shown that under the Youth Olympic Games, a group of 51 companies had done business and billed at least $1 million. Months later, we expanded the search, not only because new supporting business evidence related to the YOG appeared, but because Buenos Aires administration, headed by Horacio Rodríguez Larreta and Diego Santilli, continued to enable compensatory payments long after the activities ended. The exhaustive search allows to expand from 51 to 65 the companies that invoice more than $1 million, thanks to this event. This directly contradicts what was stated by the former head of government of the city of Buenos Aires and current president of the nation, Mauricio Macri, who promised that the expenses would be measured. In fact, the campaign promise for the city, presented on July 4th, 2013, before the IOC by Mauricio Macri, at the moment head of the government of the city, and Gerardo Wertheim, then president of the Argentinian Olympic Committee and member of the IOC, established an expense of, at the beginning, the expenses were taken care, but soon after the process towards the YOG in Buenos Aires began, and when the selection as city stopped being used in the mass media communication, the real business appears. Over the months and years, these 65 companies, which conform the Million Club list, pocketed the equivalent of the great majority of companies benefiting from the most important tenders are regular suppliers of the state, from the autonomous city of Buenos Aires, as well as from the national government. 2 out of 3 of these 65 companies have direct links for having directory members with family bonds, for having been contributors to Cambiemos, the party that has governed the city of Buenos Aires for 12 years and the nation for the last 4 in the electoral campaigns of 2015 and 2017, or having been involved in administrative irregularities by agreements signed with the administrators of the city of Buenos Aires and the nation. It becomes even more serious. We reviewed the operations of the companies, and it was found that at least 42 of them benefited from contract surcharges. The gold medal in the podium is occupied by the Corporation Andina de Fomento. In 2016, the financial institution located in Caracas, Venezuela, authorized a loan for $160 million that technically should be applied to the construction cost of the Olympic Village. The loan request not only meant increasing the indebtedness expected for 2016 by 20%, but the accumulated interest will be mean that when the total payment is completed in 2026, the city of Buenos Aires will have to disburse $235 million. The silver medal goes to Criba S.A., with concessions for almost $63 million. The construction company is owned by Alberto and Eduardo Taracido, 2 brothers who contributed with at least $1 million to the presidential campaign of Mauricio Macri in 2015. The company exhibited its versatility by lifting 2 blocks of flats, the gymnastics stadium, 2 multi-purpose stadiums, and performing cleaning and maintenance on public spaces. The podium of big billers is completed by Sudamericana S.A., with just over $56 million. Its president, Rudy Bogiano Leopold, a broker of Chilean origin, who is part of the Urban Development Forum, whose function is to advise Horacio Rodríguez Larreta, head of the government of the city of Buenos Aires, in property policies. Towards the Youth Olympic Games, the company managed to keep development of 120 housing units, distributed in 4 towers, the A1 and A2 sports halls, and the new Olympic Park buildings, which were tendered in February of this year. Another mention, and fourth place, is for Niro Construcciones S.A., owned by Lucio Niro, one of the main lobbies of the construction and politics of our country, who received almost 40 million for taking over the construction of the aquatic complex. His lack of expertise is subject made him outsource Mirta Puls, an Italian company whose local representative at the time of winning the tender on March 2017 was Orlando Mocagata, Undersecretary of Ports of the Nation, who is prosecuted by the judge Ariel Lijo for poor performance of the civil service. The tender for the stadium that hosts the Olympic pool was the second highest, $50 million. This is another case, the Marie Terán de Bueyes Stadium. The roof was in the floor for almost 10 years. It was budgeted by the city in almost $20 million, but finally cost this number. The Marie Terán de Bueyes Stadium was one of the venues of the Youth Olympic Games, but with another explication of the government, it's only used in the Olympic Games to practice martial arts and for a barbecue for volunteers. So $56 million to the trash. The following is the Brazilian company Faz Engenharia Montagens S.A. The company owned by Antonio Domingo Fasolari made a temporary alliance with Estructura y Servicios S.A. to be able to do business in Argentina. Fasolari entity accumulates in Brazil almost 100 sentences for breach of contracts, some of them linked to the 2007 Pan American Games, the FIFA World Cup in Brazil 2014, and the Olympic Games in Rio de Janeiro 2016. The bad result in the Rio de Janeiro citizens who arrived with scandals after their participation in the Olympic Games in Rio de Janeiro 2016 and earning almost this number. The Youth Olympic Games contract at least 30 Brazilian citizens. The majority of them are prosecuted in Brazil for corrupt in the Rio 2016 construction and linked to several companies, Brazilian, that work in Argentina in the youth. This is another company linked to the government of the city. This is the case of an hospital, the Cecilia Grayson Hospital, that for law of the city must be opened before the games start, but the government accelerated the construction, and in April of this year they collapsed. This is the podium of overpriced companies in the Youth Olympic Games, but we not talk about each one, but we can see the percentage over budget by the city. This is a portal of Buenos Aires Compras, where all the tenders must be registered, and stop registering the tenders 5 months before the games starts. So we can track manually all the tenders, buys, and contracts in the Gazette of Buenos Aires. I have very little time, so I pass through. This is the Lausanne connection. Wertheim, the president of the Argentine Olympic Committee, paid 4 million euros to Vero Communication from Mike Lee, former member of the IOC, to gain that Buenos Aires gained the third Youth Olympic Games. The money came from the public arts, and the subject was consulting. This is the case of Frank Fredericks, who is condemned for received for voting to Rio de Janeiro, and was the in charge member to controlling the construction and all the advance in Buenos Aires before the youth starts. Well, the journalist investigation of the Youth Olympic Games, in addition of corruption, difference of power, overpricing and excessive public spending, and other aspects, the history of the construction and sale of the housing complex that was the Olympic Village, which so far was only shared with 7 families who live almost alone between 30 poorly lit towers. Meanwhile, 1,040 families continue to wait. Also, the stadium built that are now great white elephants, which were planned to be proposed as new high-performance sports center. Also, the forgetfulness of the athletes who were champions and some one who retired at the age of 18. Argentine athletes were not paid the promised price, and only 1 of 6 receives a monthly scholarship of $130. In addition of irregularities in the selection of the suppliers, purchase, acquisition and distribution of sport supplies, half of the contracts were for direct purchase and with companies without experience in sport technology. The city of Buenos Aires paid $10 million for various sport supplies, which after the Youth Olympic Games should be transferred to the different national federations. 1 year after the event, only 2 federations have the material and 30 continue to wait. Also, 172 people were hired, giving priority to blood ties and or political ideology, to a cost exceeding the $20 million. The most resonant case we published, and that many tried to hide, was that Sarah Wertheim, the son of Gerardo Wertheim, announcer and daughter of Gerardo Wertheim, who was included in the structure of the Youth Olympic Games as ceremony coordinator of the Directorate of the Cultural and Educational Program. Finally, the business behind the artistic shows that surrounded the Youth Olympic Games. A higher amount than $60 million was spent in the enormous expense of the opening ceremony stands out. The vast majority of the companies that got the contracts are linked to the government. Only a final words. This is the total cost of the Youth Olympic Games. When budgeted in $2,000 million, and Thomas Bach in a press conference said that Buenos Aires spent 14% less. I have the video, but I don't have any time. Well, to finish, I would like to thank Play the Game, all the staff of Play the Game, especially Maria and Jensen, to give me the opportunity to stay here. Ernesto, it's my friend and my colleague. He would be here, but passed away 20 days ago, and I must took his place here. So, thank you for listening, and thank you.
Thank you, Federico, for taking on your colleagues' work, and I know it's a very difficult situation for you and your colleagues in Buenos Aires, and our solidarity and thoughts with you and your research. So, thank you. Now I'd like to invite Mr. Yamazaki, who will present about the human rights progress or lack thereof in Tokyo.
Thank you, Federico, for your fantastic presentation. So I'm going to talk about the Tokyo 2020, but before, how can I manage it? So before going to the Tokyo 2020 stuff, you know what's happening in Japan right now? Rugby World Cup. And the Japanese national team is amazingly good. So I'm missing so much. I want to come back to Japan as soon as possible. But anyway, I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about the current status of the Tokyo 2020. So I'm a sports lawyer. I've been working for this sports industry for more than 20 years, and I'm a member of this very long name of the committee. Member of Human Rights, Labor, Involvement, and Cooperation Working Group. Yes, yes. This is I'm a member of the working group, and I'm gonna report on what we are doing, and I'm gonna give you one good news and one bad news about the current situation of Tokyo 2020. So this is the slogan of the Tokyo 2020 Olympics and the Paralympics. Be better together. Good word, right? Be better together. Then in this context, they're saying that human rights, we respect, Tokoku respects human rights. And also they are in compliant, they will be in compliant with UN guiding principles for business and human rights. So what they are saying is that they aim to firmly incorporate diversity and inclusion, D&I, into every area of the operation of the games to respect human rights. Very good. And also Tokyo 2020 operate the games in accordance with the UN guiding principles of business and human rights, which is good. So this is the what they are saying based on the documents. You can check this document on website. So based on this, what they are doing is this. In accordance with the UN guiding principles of business and human rights, we have set forth a clear policy in the Sustainability Plan version 2 for acting on responsibility to respect human rights. So they are constantly saying that we're going to respect human rights, which is good. And also, they identified 3 aspects in terms of human rights risks. The first one is human rights risks at the workplaces, day-to-day workplaces. Secondly, human rights risks at the venues in the game time. The third one is supply chain. So they have created a sourcing code. And also in relation to this, they have set up a grievance mechanism to eradicate any human rights violations. So the policy is good, but what's the reality? So that's a question. So based on the report published in March this year, they say that in addition to establishing a hotline for workers to use during everyday operations, I don't think it's been really used by many of the workers, to be honest. But they're saying that they have set up the hotline for workers. They have also set up, or they have also working on studying structures to ascertain problems involving human rights, labor, and other issues at competition venues during the games. This is what I've been working on as a member of the task force, which I will come back on. Then also, they say they are also working on creating associated guidelines to prevent, to eradicate any human rights violations. So that is what they say based on the progress report. Then based on this, I, as a member of Human Rights, Labor, Involvement, and Cooperation Working Group, it's a very long name, again. We have set up the task force. I'm the leader of task force on games time risk. So what we are doing is to create a guidebook for staff members, for management people at Tokyo Organizing Committee regarding the possible human rights risk at the venue. So for example, you can easily imagine the situation where in the stadium, some of the fans, go really extreme, saying that saying some discriminatory words or the discriminatory behavior against, for example, LGBT people or something like that. That kind of a thing is a typical human rights violation at the stadium. So we are creating a manual to educate our staff members, to educate the staff members or volunteer staff members at the venues regarding what to do if they find such kind of fans' behavior. So what is the best way to be really inclusive to any kind of different diversified people, and also what to do when you find human rights violation at the stadium, like a discriminatory banners or the discriminatory chant or something like that. So we are working on it. So that the task force has been working on creating a guidebook on games time risk. So it was supposed to be completed by October, which is this month, but it's been delayed. So our current deadline is the end of this year. So after that, we're gonna publish it to the stakeholders. Or strictly speaking, we are planning to publish it to the stakeholders for their consultation, for their input. So of course, we have to be really inclusive to any kinds of stakeholders to eradicate any possible human rights violations. So in order to do this, we have to be really inclusive to all kinds of stakeholders. So for example, we have already consulted with stakeholders and experts such as Center for Sports and Human Rights, Aragon's Associates, which is led by Steve Gibbons, who was involved in London 2012, and Human Rights Watch. So their input have been really helpful, and we will be continuing to get such kind of inputs. So I'd like to encourage all of you to give us some inputs, because as I pointed out, the Tokyo is saying that they be better together. They're gonna be the most inclusive games ever. So this is not just a word, this is a commitment. So I, as a member of the task force, have to be really open for any kinds of course, criticism or the inputs or the complaints or the opinions, something like that. But I'm going to give you bad news regarding the human rights risks regarding the event. So Tokyo has set up a grievance mechanism for the sustainable sourcing code. However, all of the 8 cases, correction, it's actually 9 cases already, brought to GMSSC, grievance mechanism for the sustainable sourcing code, have been rejected due to the incompetence. So what they are saying is that oh, we cannot deal with the case because this is out of our jurisdiction. But in order for them to be really inclusive, they have to be somewhat flexible in accepting those kind of claims. So one of the good examples of the claim is from the BWI. The workers. So they are really concerned about the working environment of the construction site of the national stadium, new national stadium. So they have made some complaints against the Togo, but it's been all rejected because of the reason of the incompetence of the deal with the case. I have been massively criticizing this kind of behavior by Togo because it's not really inclusive. They say they're going to be really inclusive, but what they are doing, in relation to the grievance mechanism, is not really inclusive. So accessibility, so there is lack of accessibility of the grievance mechanism is a problem. So actually, I was going to say the same thing in the next meeting of grievance mechanism. So I'm on advisory panel of the grievance mechanism. I was going to complain about it, but I missed the opportunity because the meeting has been set tomorrow, so I cannot attend the next meeting. So they maybe intentionally set the date, but anyway, I cannot attend the meeting. I don't have an opportunity to say such kind of thing in the meeting. So anyway, the last thing I'd like to talk about is what we are doing next. So the first one is we're going to set up the advisory board for the game time risk. So I will be involved in the advisory board for the game time risk. So I will be at the stadium or at the stand center to monitor any type of violations at the game time. So I will look at all of the stadium together with my colleagues to see there's any violation of human rights. And also, I will keep working on improving the accessibility of grievance mechanism. So that's the two things, which I'm going to do. So I think stakeholder engagement is really key. I will be working on it and be better together. So I'd like to encourage you to give us your input. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd like to now invite Dr. Professor Harry-Arne Solberg.
Okay, welcome everybody and thanks for attending. I'm going to talk about the World Road Cycling Championship, which was hosted in Bergen, Norway 2 years ago. We had quite a big research project on that, and I'll present part of this project today, and some other things on Wednesday. Okay, so the title, as you see, about externalities. I mean, definition first. I mean, not all of you are economists. Externalities, the definition, is cost or benefits incurred or received by a third party. It could be monetary, non-monetary, positive, negative. And event-related examples could be tourism, improvement of public health. It could be if children are motivated to take up the sport, the festival atmosphere and whatever. Tangible, intangible impacts, actually. And the fact is that these, the prospect of creating such impacts are very often used as an argument in application for financial funding from the government, actually. So this presentation is about, okay, was these effects really created or not? Some few words about the championship, as you see. yeah, quite huge. According to the organizer, well, it was police to be precise, roughly 700,000 spectators, 300 million TV viewers, which can be discussed or no, but at least that's a figure that they announced actually. And it, unfortunately, it suffered the same destiny as many other major events actually. The organizer went bankrupt. Suppliers also went bankrupt. And one thing which is important to have in mind with these events, I mean, we're talking about deficits, surplus, and so on, but you also have to have in mind that a lot of costs they will, are paid by the public sector, either in financial transfer, as you see here, 13.3 million, but also in services, free services, which the organizers don't pay for. For example, police. Which is quite huge now because of, I mean, it started with the September 11 and since then the security cost has increased dramatically for major sports events. So, yeah. So what about externalities? Well, roughly some anecdotal facts about tourism and so on, tourist impacts and so on. Yeah, there came some visitors from outside Bergen, but significantly less than expected. As an example, they expected 5,000 what we call caravans, or these camping cars actually. 5,000 was expected, 245 appeared, less than 5%. They calculated with 50,000 room nights. The actual figures ended up on 19,000 actually. So, and the hotels, according to them, they had roughly the same occupancy rate as they had the year before in the same period actually. But this research is about the health impacts actually, because there was an objective to encourage locals to cycle more when exercising, but also in daily traffic actually. And as we see, one of the respondents that we interviewed, we did about 50 interviews with respondents in some in Bergen municipality, some in the organizing committee, some in the suppliers, and so on. So there seems to be the attitude among many organizers. We can't just host an event for an event. Actually, it has to create something more than that. Actually. And this was also used, the prospect of creating externalities, and in this case, improvement of health effects and so on, was also highlighted in the application for governmental funding, actually. Roughly 50% of the financial support came from the national government, actually. As we see, public health, urban development, and environment, active life, cycle more often in the traffic, and reduce pollution. To achieve this, they had a program, specific earmarked program, a bicycle education program for children, last for the 2 years period. A public health program called Cycling to the World Championship, which was about encouraging people to use cycling more. Different events and so on should be used. Also for older people, teaching plan for primary schools and so on. And this specific program received financial support for a little bit more than 500,000 US dollars actually. Okay, so the data came from, as I said, we did 3 surveys among local residents. 712 respondents replied in the first, which was done a month before the event. Then 2 post-event studies, one a month after and one year after, actually. The bracket figures are the percentage of the response rates. In addition, in Norway we have a system, many municipalities have registered cycling activities. Bergen has, during this period from 2014 to 2018, 18 locations where they register the number of cyclists passing. In addition, there is also this national survey, which is where they, among others, measure which kind of traffic modes are you used, or is your main modes on a daily basis, actually. Not the holidays, but on daily basis, actually. Okay, so the results. How am I on time? Okay, he said he will never buy me a beer if I'm running over, so I have to be quick, actually. So this is the first survey. See the question is how many or percentage that were inspired to cycle more often in daily transport. And we use a grade a scale from 1 to 7. 1 totally disagree, 4 is neutral, and 5, 6, and 7 totally agree. And as you see, it doesn't indicate that they met the target here. And if you go to the other question, inspired to cycle more often when exercises, it's the same pattern. And the third, inspired to exercise more, hardly any implication. We did a regression on this actually, but I mean, since the figures hardly moved, I mean, regression is sort of superfluous actually. But we don't have time to present that. Okay, the other registrations. Yeah. Here, the results are on monthly basis. And the mean values is, as we see in the figure here. So we did a t-test. And for all months except from February, there were no differences, significant differences. Okay. The exception was February and March, but what was true was that the activities was higher before the championship. The championship was hosted in September 2007, so there were several more months than in the period before than after actually. So no indication that they met the target based on these figures either. And finally, the national survey, which is based on survey among residents, and as we see, the blue represent the figures from 2014. The orange from 2018, and we see there is no increase in activity in Bergen, while on the other hand, the other cities which didn't host any World Championship had a higher activity both in 2014 and also an increase, except from Kristiansand. All of that significantly higher actually. So to the conclusion, straightforward, they didn't meet the exceptions. People were not inspired. Other cities more successful than Bergen. And Boris Johnson, you know him. Currently the Prime Minister in the UK, but previously he was the major in London. And London was this close from signing the departure on the Tour de France in 2017. So everything was ready, they had agreed, negotiated and so on. And it was all about signing the agreement. But then he changed his mind, and as you see, I will not waste cycling money on something that would only deliver brief benefits. So they calculated that the total cost will to 35 million pound, 40 million US dollars or something like that, and it's not worth it. So, yeah, he had a point, I would say, if based on our data. Okay.
Thank you.
I knew I could motivate him with alcohol. Okay, thanks very much, Harry. And now we have a surprise dual presentation regarding stadium financing and Calgary.
Thank you to Mr. Solberg for reiterating everything we're just about to go tell you.
So today we are going to present on sports stadium financing generally, focusing on North America, but we'll bring in some stats from Canada and the EU. We're first going to go over what public financing is, why governments actually justify what they're doing, what actually happens with public financing, and then take it all together and summarize the new Calgary Flames Stadium. So, brief history of public financing of sports stadiums generally. Public financing didn't actually start in the US until post-World War II. Until 1950, the only team to play in a publicly financed stadium were the Cleveland Indians. By the late 1960s, public financing of sports stadiums begins. By 1970, 70% of all new stadiums are publicly financed. By 1990, 43 out of 50 new stadiums were publicly financed, and by 2012, over 89% of all new stadiums, both being built or refurbished, were publicly financed. 50% of the costs of this were borne by taxpayers. We don't actually foresee this changing. We'll update you in a couple of years. So, how can governments actually finance new sports stadiums? There's three ways. First, public financing can occur with direct payments. So, for example, the province of Saskatchewan contributed $80 million, and the city of Regina provided $73 million towards the new Mosaic Stadium in Regina. Second, municipalities can offer favorable leases. For example, Komsky Park, the home of the Chicago White Sox, not Hawks, I'll learn my sports teams eventually, is leased for $1 per year, with the city of Chicago paying all insurance and any capital repairs over $500,000 US. Third, maybe the most interesting, is the use of tax-exempt bonds. Since 2000, $13 billion US has been issued for stadium construction alone, period. We've summarized all the data. If you actually want to read a paper and look at all the stats and challenge me on this. And technically, fourth is even when stadiums were financed by loans or tax-exempt bonds, some of these loans actually get forgiven. So while they are issued, governments write them off. For example, Manitoba wrote off $86 million in loan and loan interest. See, we're not supposed to be in there. So, why do governments actually rationalize what they're doing? Generally, it falls into three categories. Advocates of new stadiums suggest that they attract tourists, that they encourage modern business development, they indicate that the local economy will experience positive economic benefits, including the creation of hundreds, if not thousands, of jobs. And furthermore, they will experience economic growth, development, and urban renewal. For example, in Rogers Place in Edmonton, the city of Edmonton boasted that 6,000 new jobs were created solely for the construction of that, whereas the city of Calgary in their arena boasts that $4.25 million Canadian will be created in new hospital expenditures alone. Governments, while they might present a pretty package of why financing a sports stadium is beneficial, it's often actually the result of professional sports teams and their ownership exerting significant pressure on governments to finance these entities. Several examples are prevalent. The New York Yankees threatened to relocate unless a new site was found, and they received a $431 million US tax-exempt bond to stay in New York. And the Oakland Raiders threatened to relocate from Oakland to Vegas, and Nevada Tourism directly paid $750 million US for the construction of a new stadium in Oakland. We did a ton of research into this. There's a ton of other researchers who've analyzed the reality of publicly financed stadiums. While the average taxpayers gain limited benefits, stadium owners and stadium athletes derive greater rewards than their associated contributions. Owners receive a significant amount of the increased revenue stream from new stadiums, including naming rights, signage, and advertising revenues, and increased receipts from both gate admissions and concession sales. Professional athlete salaries are roughly proportionate to how much the stadium makes, so they receive a substantial share of this. While many economists acknowledge the existence of consumption benefits associated with sports facilities, these benefits are not sufficient to justify the tax costs to all residents in any given municipality. All other things being equal, the presence of an NFL team increased annual rents in the city by 8% and decreased wages by 4% as compared to a non-NFL city. Paying for these stadiums and arenas also lasts beyond the useful project life. For example, 10 facilities built in the 1970s and 80s, including the Superdome in New Orleans, the Silverdome in Pontiac, and the now obsolete Kingdome in Seattle, each cost the city alone $1 million in debt financing for a stadium that no longer exists. So in order to wrap up everything I've just said, Karen's going to summarize this with the Canadian Calgary Flames.
So what we thought is, okay, well, let's take a current example. And when we look at the Flames, they give us a very good example of everything that Brittany's talked about today. So in 2016, the Calgary Flames and the City of Calgary, they engaged in negotiations over the development of a new Flames stadium. They called it the Calgary Next. And now, while these negotiations were doomed to failure, before they concluded, the Calgary Flames indicated that, okay, in the event that we don't get this new stadium, we're going to take the Flames, we're going to leave, we're going to find a new city. Now, negotiations restarted in 2019, and with Plan B, so this is the Victoria Park option. So this became a reality on July 30th of 2019, after a short 7-day window for public feedback was provided. And the City Council, in this case, voted 11-4 to ratify this deal. So, to put this in context, the deal came right on the heels of the City of Calgary cutting $60 million from its budget for fire, for police, and for its healthcare. So, in an attempt to balance the municipal deficit. So, in the final agreement, what does that look like? Well, the city and the CSEC each agreed to pay $275 million Canadian to cover the building's construction costs. And they agreed to split the cost of any potential overruns. The city agreed to pay $280 million in direct costs, another $150 million in indirect costs, and they additionally agreed to contribute $12.4 million, approximately 90% of the costs of the demolition of the Saddle Dome, the current home of the Calgary Flames. On the other side of the table, the Flames ownership gets to pay nothing in property taxes, but they do agree to contribute $75 million to local amateur sports. So when I turn to the profit on the arena, and under this deal, the city retains 2% of the ticket revenues for all of the events hosted, with an anticipated revenue of $155 million over the proposed 35-year useful life of the stadium. This revenue is, however, capped to $3 million annually for the first 5 years of the lease. This ticket charge is lower than the 2017 Calgary Next proposal, and it's also lower than the rate that was set for the Rogers Arena in Edmonton. So one of the major justifications that we did see for this Victoria Park option was that the development is consistent with a number of the City of Calgary's municipal development plans, which date back to 2009. And so its development is proposed to provide improvements in civic pride, urban redevelopment, and as Brittany had earlier mentioned, a number of new jobs to the city. So while the project comes with a potential net loss of $47 million over the project's 35-year life, Calgarians have actually been assured by the city's mayor that this net loss will be offset by the project's intangible benefits. So we looked into this a little bit further, and we found a 2013 study which indicated that the current Flames Arena provides approximately $82,000 in intangible benefits to Calgary residents. A quick math calculation shows that over a 35-year useful life of the stadium, this would only be approximately $2.87 million in direct benefits to residents of the city of Calgary. So that's a far cry from the $47 million that is projected to be offset by intangible benefits by Calgary's mayor. So I guess what we're saying is, in conclusion, we don't foresee public financing of stadiums changing in the near future. However, there are a number of studies that would suggest it's more beneficial for municipalities to have these stadiums not be publicly funded and not be financed through the use of all of the different financing methods Brittany mentioned earlier. So, pending any questions, that's our presentation.
Thanks to Brittany and Karen for that and your timeliness. And now, last but not least, Christian Jensen. And then after Christian is done, I'll ask all panelists to come back up so we can have question and answer.
So thank you all for coming. I was going to start to talk about a bit about legacies and how the research doesn't really prove that there are any legacies, but I think the previous presenters have made that point very, very clear. So I'll just skip to what I'm going to talk about is the public celebration as a sort of alternative argument for hosting at least major sport events based on my running PhD project on major sports events in Denmark and Norway. The overall project is about the motivation stakeholders have for engagement in these, support these events, and one obvious reason is typically legacies, which they point out, and then researchers come and try to make the case that there barely is any benefits from legacies. Then there is a public celebration, which you could say is an intangible benefit, but I try to get it. I'm not seeing that as something which can be measured in money, but more the party we have around the celebration in the time where the not celebration where the event takes place, or is it some kind of mixture? The project and what I'm going to talk about is based on case studies from these recent 5 major sports events in Denmark and Norway, and then one which didn't came to be, namely the bid for the Winter Olympics in Norway in 2022. Just to give you some sense of the scale, as Harry-Arne Solberg mentioned, the most expensive of these is probably the Road Cycling World Championship in Norway, hosted 2 years ago, which ended up costing, was it about $30 million? So that's, of course, significantly smaller than what you usually consider a mega event like the Summer Olympics or the FIFA World Cup. We're talking about something much, much smaller. Also, all these events wouldn't have taken place, I think it's safe to say, without the public support. There's a significant amount of public money going into this. And at first I was a bit, and I'm going to present in the States, and that's probably all different, but also the former presenters come to help and show that there are also cases of public investment in not sport events, but at least sport facilities in the States, which with many of the same problems that we face with sport events. So, first I conducted interviews with 4 groups of stakeholders from these events, and now I've collected the interviews, and these quotes, they so represent the various sectors. I'm not going to show this was from that case and that was from the other case. I think it's fair to, you have to trust me that I don't have the time to show you quotes from all the cases, but these, so they have the gist of it. So the first thing I would like to show is that across all the sectors, there was this idea of exactly legacies, the event as some form of investment. The public authorities, for instance, in Oslo, when they were debating whether to go in and bid for the Winter Olympics, they saw the city needed a huge transformation, and hosting the Olympics, that would mean that the municipality would get access to money from the national government. Commercial partners, for instance, sponsors, well, that's not really a surprise that they have a financial perspective. Sport federations have that too, and then event organizations, that is, organizations involved either locally or on a national level in stating the event and advising the stakeholders of the event. So in practical terms, they have also happiness, pride perspective on a national level, but also internationally. The event should, for instance, this is from Sport Event Denmark, a publicly founded event organization in Denmark. And internationally, the events they help host, it should also brand Denmark and develop trade relations. So that's the same story which we just heard about tangible or economic legacies. But when I did the interviews, it also became clear to me that there is a second side to this, also for the stakeholders, and that is the public celebration. So when I did the interviews, the stakeholders, they would often start to recall anecdotes from thinking back on the event, and what they recalled, that wasn't, oh yeah, I remember the championship in Bergen, we had so many more overnight guests and we earned so much money from it. No, what they recalled was that, oh yeah, it was just great, we had this fantastic atmosphere in the city, it was a great experience, everybody was happy. So that public celebration, that's the point I would like to make, is quite important, I think, when people come and suggest, wouldn't it be great if we had this or that event in our time, our town, or our city in a couple of years, then coming to mind for the personal stakeholders, that is, like when I was a researcher asking these questions, that then it's first and foremost, I think, the personal experience, and then eventually it all comes into a nice package in combination with the legacies. So we have a, let's see, yeah, so we have a commercial partner, a sponsor, telling that he remembered, he didn't mention anything about what the business earned from this sponsorship, but he remembered getting the Willies still and thinking about how they helped making that event happen. Sports federations like to public celebration, that's putting the bar at our highest. The event organization also emphasizes that there has to be some sort of entertainment. So of course that plays into and support the legacies. I'm not saying that they see this as two completely different things, except perhaps when looking at the quote from the public authority, that's a civil servant from a municipality who in the aftermath experienced that, well, at that point in time, just after the event, the politicians, they weren't really that interested in learning how much money did we really make from this event. Then it was more, they dwelled and thought back really more or less only on the event as the party it had been. So there are these two forms, event where either as an investment, where the event gives something to the stakeholders, or the event as a celebration, they all contribute to the event so that the event eventually becomes this celebration. And right now in the research and in the debate, I think the investment argument gets the most of the attention, and that's fair because it's very used by the stakeholders, and it's important to point out that it's rarely the case that these legacies actually materialize. But I would also make the case that maybe it would be beneficial to put more emphasis on the event as a public celebration, because that's actually an argument and a case you can make of an event which actually will, or like to realize, to be realized when you host an event, that you can make it a public celebration. And then these are all cases of events which are considerably smaller than the Summer Olympics and the FIFA World Cup. So the legacies might not be that big of a subject compared to the FIFA World Cup. Or you could make the case that if you can't justify the event as a public celebration, then maybe the event is too big. And final note, if public event celebration is the best argument, I'm not here to say that that should be the only argument, or that if, as long as you could say, well, we make this event a public celebration, then everything is allowed. Of course, it has to be within the budget, and what's happening in Qatar, they can't just say, well, we make a proper celebration, then it's okay, but we violate the human rights. Definitely not. Thank you.
I would like to invite all the presenters to come back up to the table and take your positions in front of your name cards, and we will begin the brutal interrogation of your presentations. And I'd like to open the floor. Is there a microphone? Yes, please. I have a question here in the front immediately.
Josh Fine from HBO. For Christian and Harry-Arne, I'm curious if you can give us a sense of some of these events for those of us that don't know a lot about it. Like, do these cities pay like a hosting fee to UCI or whoever the federation is? Like, how big is that? Who bears these costs? What's the care and feeding like for the federation members? Are these sort of like mini Olympics with some of the issues we've seen with those in the past?
They pay a fee, and that's an interesting question because they paid 7 million euro to host the fee, and the year before it was hosted in Doha, and they paid 10 million. So the UCI said that, okay, no, everybody has to pay 10 million actually. But they rejected that, so they got away with paying 7 million. In addition, they also had to buy for the marketing rights, which was a loss actually, because they paid more for the marketing rights. They needed that to allow to sell sponsors and domestic sponsors actually. So I think they lost about $1 million on that project idly actually. So it's a very interesting and important question you raised there, because I mean, I'm looking into different sports and there are different models actually. Cycling is a sport where the market forces are in work actually. Skiing, for example, is quite different, much more regulated, less risk. You're not allowed to sell sponsors actually, or you have some very, very limited ability to do that. But on the other hand, FIS, the International Skiing Federation, they give support so they don't have to take the risk actually. But cycling is much more risky actually. And it's quite interesting to look at the different sports, how they organize the events actually. To understand it, I think it's important to have an auction perspective in mind actually, because that's what it is about actually. That's why the IOC is a little bit down now actually, which Andy can say more about, because they struggle with finding bidders actually. Yeah, I mean, there are, maybe you should.
Yeah, you're the economist of us, so I don't really have the numbers, but like Harry-Arne said, I can't really find that it's, yeah, they have to pay a fee, the financing, typically, the earnings from the event, the public support, and yeah, I guess that, and then sponsors, of course.
And can I drill down just quickly? Who bears the cost, like, I don't know, flying in the athletes or that kind of thing? Is it the host committee? And secondly, and relatedly, were there troubling costs associated, in your view, with taking care of UCI Federation board members, putting them up at nice hotels? Some of the things we've read about with the IOC and FIFA that, what some people feel like is being treated like gods, that kind of thing. Did you see some of that with some of these federations?
Yeah, I don't remember exactly figures actually, but they had to pay some of the cost of accommodations cost for the UCI and also for the races actually. But I don't recall all the exact figures actually. Yeah, but let's say the pattern varies actually significantly. I did another research on chess Olympiad, which was hosted in Tromsø 2014 actually. And with the same argument being used when they applied for financial funding from the government. Yeah, it will be boost Tromsø as a tourist destination, and both the long-term and the short-term tourist impacts actually. What happened actually was that, I mean, Tromsø is not a big city, 70,000 people living there actually. So the organizer had to book absolutely all hotel rooms in the city, and on an ordinary basis, without this chess tournament, there would be a 50% occupancy rate actually. So ordinary tourists had to stay away actually. And so when they did the calculations, we found out that the only benefit for Tromsø was the governmental funding, on which in that occasion in the region of $10 million actually. So I mean, yeah, economists, we are some people think that we are very negative towards the events actually, and that they lose money on that. The benefit can be, it's not right actually to say they lose money, but the benefit very often are the governmental funding actually, because they sneak in the queue. They get money for upgrading of infrastructures that they otherwise wouldn't have, or would have much later on actually. That's applied to the Olympics, that's applied to a lot of events actually.
I think it's interesting to hear about other things than the cold figures. Also, as you, Christian, says about creating a party for people, other things unmeasurable about these events. Federico, I'd like to ask you, because the terrible numbers you showed about the Youth Olympics, but what is the legacy of the Youth Olympics, in your opinion, in the citizens' eyes of Buenos Aires? Do they remember a party, having a good time, people were looking to Buenos Aires and you were showing the city and the country to the world? Or do they only see, okay, we lost several $100 billion in corruption and in buildings that we're never going to use? What is the legacy of these Youth Olympics, in your opinion, in the eye of the normal citizen in Buenos Aires?
Thank you for the question. I respond with facts.
Yeah.
In my opinion, none. It was $1 billion to the trash because we have white elephants that are closed before the Youth Olympic Games. The Olympic Village that was for social departments, flats, only 7 families live actually there, and 1,040 families still wait for his first home and continue going.
Yeah.
The government never seems to thought to gain something about the Youth Olympic Games. There is a contract, a particular contract that the city of Buenos Aires paid $8 million to Coca-Cola to be a sponsor of the Youth Olympic Games. I thought it's the first time in the world that a city paid for a company to be a sponsor. We had a lot of irregularities. There is also a connection between Wertheim and Thomas Bach and the election of Thomas Bach in Buenos Aires that linked directly with the city of Buenos Aires to be the host of the third Youth Olympic Games. It's an event to do business. In South America, it's to do business. Wertheim kept an action for one of the best parcels of Buenos Aires, and he won it. He's an intimate friend of the President Mauricio Macri and the governor of the city, Horacio Rodríguez Larreta. Okay, next.
Yes, I'd like to follow up with a question to Federico. I was actually in Copenhagen in 2009 hosting that event where the Rio 2016 was elected, and I was in Buenos Aires in 2013 when the yacht was Buenos Aires was elected to be the yacht host. I remember at both those two events, especially in Copenhagen, that the president of Brazil and president of the National Bank of Brazil and other people had very, very emotional pleas to the Olympic movement. asking the Olympic movement to give the games to South America, because there has never been an Olympic event in South America. So, but your answer to that is that should the Olympic movement avoid going to South America, because I think we will have the same problems nowhere, no matter where we go in South America. So should we stay away from South America?
Well, yes, in part yes. Carlos Nosman, a good friend of Wertheim, and the Kuwaiti Al-Sabah, another friend of Wertheim, positioned the South American bloc in the IOC for Rio and for Buenos Aires. Nosman is in jail after the Lavallato. Al-Sabah was auto-suspended, but in March of this year was re-elected for an 8th time in the Olympic Committee of Asia. There is, in my opinion, there is a crime organization that moves worldwide. Wertheim is part of it. Nosman was part of it. Al-Sabah is part of it. In more and less, but we must analyze case by case. In South America, when it's a place of the biggest corruption in Earth, is more visible. But we saw it in Qatar, we saw it in Rio, and we saw it with France, because France in 1988 was host the World Cup, and there is still prosecute around the votes to France to win the votes. So I agree and disagree with your comment, but I explain why.
If I could just comment on your question and agree with Federico in the sense that I think there's a perception in the West that, or in North America and Western Europe, that Latin America is somehow more corrupt than Western Europe, or more corrupt than the United States, or that Japan is not corrupt in similar ways. We're very much better at hiding it because the Northwest tends to write the rules of the game. And we do not tend to play by those rules when we don't choose to. And the Swiss are the perfect example of this. And so to say we should not go to Latin America, the Olympics should not go anywhere. The Olympics should stop in this regard. If we want to go by human rights criteria, what is the country that has the highest percentage of incarcerated people in the world? We're in it right now. Should we go to China with their treatment of the Uyghurs? Should we have the games in Syria? Why not? Just as corrupt as anywhere else. So I think it's the question is very well responded, but this is an institutional culture, and it's a way of opening up new business opportunities. And Rio de Janeiro Games were called O Novo Mundo, the New World, which is an inherently colonialist perspective on Latin America. And I think that these are neo-colonial forms of extraction of wealth to take it back to places like Switzerland. Questions?
Okay, so Mr. Yamazaki, with that said, what will be the legacy of the Tokyo Olympics?
That's a very, very good question. Well, this is a kind of a structural problem, and this is a constant problem since I think 1984 LA Olympics. So now that is why we are focusing on leaving a soft legacy rather than hard legacy. So, but the problem is, the challenge we have is that we have a lot of the kind of old conservative people, I would say. So the typically the former prime minister, has been really keen on bringing Olympics to Tokyo. And what he's been thinking is, doing something similar to 1964 Tokyo Olympics. It's a really old-fashioned type of thinking. But fortunately, on the other hand, we have some kind of a young, forward-looking people who are really keen on leaving good soft legacy after the Olympics. So at the operational level, we have a lot of the sensible guys. But the challenge which we have is senior management people. So that is why I always have a really hard time in persuading senior management to do something to leave soft legacy after the 2020. So they don't get the point, unfortunately. But that's why I'm really happy with working with the many people at our task force. The member of task force understands the importance of a soft legacy. So that is why I want to really work really hard on leaving a good soft legacy to make Tokyo 2020 the kind of a best example in terms of soft legacy. So please ask me the same question 1 year later.
Yeah, Andy and then John.
To follow up on the last question for Mr. Yamazaki, could you tell us what the projected final costs are of the Olympic Stadium and what the projected uses of that stadium will be after the Olympic Games are over?
The simple answer to your question is it's going to be huge.
More than the youth?
Yeah. It's going to be record-breaking figure. So I don't really know the exact figure, but anyway, it's going to be the most expensive event ever. Yeah.
And what about the projected uses for the stadium after the games are over?
There have been a lot of discussions about this, and if you look at the national stadium, we are building a new national stadium, which costs a lot, as you know. So there have been a lot of discussions. So like if you look at the London 2012 stadium, it's being used by the professional football club. And we had the same kind of idea that the Tokyo-based baseball club would use the national stadium, but for some reason it didn't work well. So nothing. There's absolutely no problem so far. So unfortunately.
My name is Johnny Coleman. I'm from a group called No Olympics LA in Los Angeles. We look at LA 84 a lot, so I'm glad you brought that up in terms of legacy, because it's our perspective that there is no actual tangible legacy that's positive from the LA 84 games. It's propped up as the Olympics, the only Olympics that's ever made money, but for who? Not a single dime of that went to the city of LA. It's sitting in a nonprofit in West Adams right now with $25 million invested in Blackstone, 10 million invested in Goldman Sachs. The community never saw that, so I completely disagree with you that there's a positive soft legacy. I think there's a soft legacy in terms of the policing that happened in 1984, and to tie that to 2020, which I was in Tokyo this summer with a lot of groups from about 8 different countries that are organizing against both that Olympics and all of them. And in the 3 categories of ways to mitigate harm during the Olympics, how do you factor in, for example, the brutal counterterrorism laws that were passed 2 years ago, facial recognition technology and laws and policies that are being passed already? How does that factor into your positive legacy plan?
So I'm not in a position to answer your question because I'm, of course, I'm a member of Tokyo Organizing Committee, but I have no authority to, speak on behalf of the Tokyo Organizing Committee. So to be honest, I'm not a big fan of the Olympic movement. So but anyway, they got the hosting rights, and in 2013, and So what we are doing, so what I'm doing personally is to try my best to make the Tokyo 2020 better. So it's a real challenge as a sports lawyer because as I said, I have been having a really hard time in engaging with the senior management. So I cannot really answer your question, but I can only say that the Olympic has a lot of problems. Then they're going to have a lot of problems, and we cannot be really optimistic about leaving a good legacy. But personally speaking, I've been a sports lawyer for 20 years, and I've been representing players. I've been a legal counsel for the players' unions. So, looking back on the 20 years ago, there was no union movement by sports athletes in Japan. But right now, as we have seen a lot in a lot of the conferences already, athletes getting more and more, powerful position in terms of advocating their rights or in terms of speaking up for the social good. I think this is a really good movement, and I'm really happy to be involved in that kind of a movement because I could never imagine the situation like this 20 years ago. When I was speaking about the players' rights to the senior management, they totally ignored us. But right now we can have a dialogue with them. So that's a big change. So getting a good understanding about the beauty of stakeholder engagement, respecting human rights, doing social good through sports is the new trend regarding the sports. So it's really different. The situation is totally different from the one in 1984 in the Los Angeles Olympics. That is why I'm really keen on doing something for soft legacy.
I have a question I'll throw to the table if no one else has immediate present one, unless you want to follow.
Yeah, I would like to add on call it a provocative perspective, because there are much critical things to say about these events and the way they are organized. But if you listen to the discussion, you sort of get the feeling that it was the FIFA World Cup that invented the terrible working conditions in Qatar and the break of human rights and so on, and corruption in Latin America. That's not the case. I mean, I've not been in Qatar, but I've been in Dubai a couple of times actually, and seen the conditions workers has there actually. It's terrible actually. So the positive side actually is, that's where you as journalists comes in, that it receives attention actually. It's a focus on it actually. I wouldn't say that the most the idle way of focusing also, but nevertheless that's at least that's one positive perspective on it actually.
And my question is that we're all talking about a similar process where public authorities are in some way publicly or stimulating with public money the sporting industry in some way, and either manufacturing consensus or following a consensus that this is for the public good, and that public good is revealed either immediately in terms of a really nice party or in quote-unquote strong legacies following the events. And that we tend, and the easiest thing for us to focus on is the economic cost, with the assumption that where that money would be spent equitably or more equitably in other arenas. No pun intended. What are, for each of you, what is the model, or is there another model, or is it impossible to live with the current situation we have? If we're going to continue down this road, as you all have suggested, must we? And if we must, how can, in democratic societies, populations be engaged to understand this, resist it, and offer alternatives? And I open that to all of you, and I think we have plenty of time to answer the question. Yes, yes, Christian.
So, well, no, I don't think it's not sustainable the way it is now, but the events I have been looking at, my impression is that they haven't been unpopular, also not in the broad public. There are some dates here they can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's not my impression. And the contrast between these events, which are considerably smaller than any of the mega events we've been discussing up until now, that is that they are smaller, they don't cost as much, they are built generally on an existing tradition for the sport in the country, they don't require new facilities, and yeah, so I think that could be some criteria to go out from. Yeah, that would be my suggestion.
Thank you.
I guess we're going down the line. For purposes of the record, this has nothing to do with my employer. It is not the opinion of them. In our paper, we actually analyzed alternative methods of financing, but decided today to not bore you with it all. If you actually take a look at Vegas and their new hockey arena, Vegas put in $10 million, correct me if I'm wrong, $10 million for the rights to an NHL team. They further built their stadium for $1.033 billion, totally privately financed. Goldman & Sachs was actually their bankers, and it's a really interesting read if you want to read their debenture agreement. So there is a way to actually do it privately. Is it going to work in all areas and all sports? Probably not. But if a city wants a team badly enough, they're going to do it privately. So in our opinion, for cities to actually do it privately, if you really want a sports team, do it privately.
Yeah, I support that analysis, and what I'd say, at least if we're looking at Calgary, we had just months prior to the new arena deal going through a vote on whether Calgary was willing to host an Olympic Games. And so it actually, the city went, okay, well, let's put this to the people. And overwhelmingly, the city was like, no, I guess we're not going to do this. And I think that is one way, at least with some of the bigger deals, to say, is this something that is going to meet the desires of your population? And in the event that it's not, is this something we should still do? And in Calgary's case, the answer was no.
I think we must analyze the structures of these organizations. We give them so much power, and now we can retrieve it. One question runs in my head is, what happens if any country postulates to host a World Cup? Or a city postulates to a summer or winter Olympic game? There are structures like, we knew it, vertically, like a masonry or a mafia. We must attack that structures to things change. And we talk about organizations that are international. We must work together, journalists, researchers, lawyers, to combat these organizations and the power of these organizations. We always saw members of this, the IOC or FIFA, moves like an ambassador with so much power and so much money in their pocket to buy anything. In Argentina, with the FIFA gate, explodes. There is a leg in Argentina. Grondona was the vice president of FIFA when Blatter was president, and he brought justice. He has the money, he has the power. He managed all the soccer in the country, and he was the vice president, the first vice president of FIFA. Was untouchable. So, in my opinion, it's only my opinion, we must attack these structures together.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we can still make the existing mega sports event better in a positive way. Of course, I said I'm not a big fan of the Olympic movement, but that is because Olympic movement has been kind of exploited based on the notion of the 20th century capitalism to seek a really short-term benefit. So, but you know, I've been a sports lawyer for 20 years, but I'm not a human rights lawyer. But what I'm doing is, you know, a lot of human rights stuff. I work with the Human Rights Watch. I work with Transparency International. I could never imagine the situation like this. So why? Because I'm a sports lawyer. I'm involved in the sports movement. That is because, you know, that is why I got involved in the human rights movement. So now we have to look at the core value of sports again. So what is the core value of sports? Sports is, you know, has a really kind of a beautiful strengths to, you know, get the people together and educate people or enlighten people about the social good. What is the social good? What is the solidarity? What is the leadership or something like that? That is what I call soft legacy. Diversity and inclusion. So, for example, Japanese people is really kind of you know, homogeneous people. Although many people are saying that the diversity is important, but you know, almost nobody got the sense of the diversity, true diversity, unlike European people, unlike American people. So Olympic can be a good opportunity to really for the Japanese people to understand the true value of diversity. So that kind of a social good has to be a core value of sports. So based on that notion, I think we can still make the mega sports event better.
Okay, I think to understand this, I mean, it has to do with the fact that when we have what we call public goods, which are satisfy two criteria: non-revealing and non-exclusive. Goods which are not sold at the market. And that's a challenge with that. Every time I teach welfare economics, I go on through this actually. The challenge is, what is the optimal quantity? As long as you don't sell it in the market, or you have to find in other ways how much to spend on it actually. And when it's financed by taxes, then all of a sudden the free riding problem appears actually, because some will benefit at the cost of others actually. And that's the Olympics is a very, very good example of that. The city will benefit from the funding from the national government. The exception is US, because in US national government only, as far as I know, they only support to the security cost actually. The rest of the world, over 50% or more is funded by the government actually. And then you have all these stakeholders, locals in the local public sector, local entrepreneurs, local tourism industry, operating as free riders actually. They want more as long as they don't pay anything for themselves actually. What to do actually? I think ideally, I mean, as I said during my presentation, they are awarded by auctions. And the best thing is if the bidders can collaborate actually. I mean, LA in 1984 is very often used as the good example, you know, the surplus and so on, because they were the only bidder actually. They could say that, okay, we do it our way, take it or leave it to the IOC, and they didn't have any choice actually. And now, because we had the Munich disaster, we had the Montreal disaster, which are still on top of the financial disaster list actually. And we had the boycott of the Moscow actually. Now we had the similar situation in recent years actually. And the Agenda 2020, yeah, it will do some improvement actually. So how much remains to be seen actually. So in the future I can see that, okay, maybe they are doing well now in Italy with the Winter Olympics in 2026 and so on. At least better than the previous one, actually. Probably may not have a Sochi again. Maybe it's going worse in Tokyo, we'll see. And then it might turn around, actually. Then the queue will line up, the queue with cities will lining up interested in the Olympics, actually. Yeah.
Two more questions.
I want to, this is on, right? I'm Andy Zimbalist. I'm an economist at Smith College in Massachusetts. And I wanted to comment on what Brittany said when she called for private financing and gave the example of Las Vegas. The reason I want to do it is because there is this notion out there that when something is declared to be private financing, that it's actually privately financed. And I think that you find in virtually all of the cases that in exchange for getting private money to finance stadiums or mega events, that what happens is the city will grant the private entity land for free or land at below market costs, below market prices, or the city will grant the private entity a tax holiday, no property taxes for 20 years and then only half of property taxes for the next 40 years. And so even though it's said to be private financing, it comes at a very substantial public cost. This has happened with several recent Olympic Games in Vancouver in 2010. The Olympic Village was going to be built privately, but the private entity that was going to build it pulled out. And so the city had to, the public money had to come in. Same problem happened with the Olympic Village in London. So I just wanted to caution that when we put forward private financing models, although it sounds good, there's usually something else going on.
So just to reiterate, we did say there are 3 ways to publicly finance, including favorable leasing. You actually look at the value of tax loss from the tax-exempt bonds issued in the US. You're looking at $21 billion in tax revenue loss since 2000 by the issuance of tax-exempt bonds. I'm not saying you're wrong, so you've got a very valid point. Private financing might not be the solution, but we don't really have another option.
Yes, I think this is a very interesting discussion, and I think it's important to get the messages that we get in this room right now. But I must, I'm a little depressed about what I hear. I come from a country, Denmark, 6 million people, the average size of the 50 states of the United States. We are among one of the least corrupted or second least corrupted country in the world. We are the country in the world with in happy index being 1 or 2 in the world for the people. We have top 5 in the world with sports participation. We have, compared with the size of the country, we are the top 5 of the world with winning medals at the Olympic Games, hosting international events, world championships and so on. Compared to the size of the world, we are also in the top 5. So what I get depressed about is that my ambition is that to spread this out to all the world, that we should go everywhere. We should have sports events everywhere. We should be together. We should learn from each other and so on. But what I hear is that it doesn't work, and we can't get out there, and the ideals we are coming with and so on will never work. So I think it's a bit depressing to listen to what we hear.
It's one of the dangers of being so happy. It's easy to get depressed.
It's depressive, we do nothing. But I think play the game is a good start. We all here. We can, every day is a good day to start. Here are researchers, journalists, academics, sport lawyers. We can start now and change it. I think there's a thing to be depressed, But if we keep there in that depressed, we do nothing. I think we have the chance and the opportunity to make something, to change something every day. And think playing the game is the perfect space and opportunity. So don't be depressed. And a coffee in the coffee break, we talk, and we start right now.
But I'd say it's not only a chance, but an obligation to do so, and that's, I think, what Play the Game is here for. Jens?
No, I think maybe I make you more depressed. No, seriously. May I have two comments? First is on the Olympic bids. I mean, I have been following all Olympic bids since '91, and I see there are big improvements under pressure with the agenda, blah blah blah. But there's one point I want to speak about a few sentences. It sounds strange, but even if they are lower, the hurdles are lower now in financial point of view and so on, I would say the Olympic bidding process, if there's still one, is even more intransparent. If you see, what I mean is, in the years before, in the 90s and in the last 10 years, there were some kind of benchmarks. You could, as an observer, you could see there's a schedule, there are bid books, we all know about lies and the big bid books and so on, but there was something you could check from outside. It's a job of journalists and others, you could check. Now, it's everything, it's in the boardroom. I mean, most of you will have realized what is happening, what's going on with 2032, with Australia and so on, yeah. And this is one point. And in theory, yes, in theory, there are, of course, under pressure, big improvements. In theory, I absolutely believe there is a possibility to host Olympics in a proper way with much lower money, with much lower money. I absolutely believe that. On the other hand, I described that, and then another point I will publish soon, and this is also, this will stop this publication will stop a kind of propaganda of the IOC. I got the numbers of all IOC payments for Rio 2016 over a period of 8 years. Every single number, every single payment with accounts, everything. I still have it in my Excel file. I must do my math. If I remember right, IOC was always claiming 1.2 billion. 1.2 billion, I think, for Rio. It's only about 700 million cash. Everything else is so-called value in kind. The problem with this value in kind is that only the IOC defines the value of value in kind. And I had these discussions with several members, and so nobody knows about that and anything. So again, what I want to say is, the message is, this is also a point for the IOC. If they still do that, they got to change. They got to change, and they still don't understand. I know in the host city agreements for Paris and LA, if I remember right, the first time you find the word value in kind. Yeah. But they still try to fool the public. This is a problem.
That's their game. That's literally their game. Well, I think that brings our session to a close. I'd like to thank warmly all our panelists for your presentations and comments. And thanks to the audience.
What's up, AZ?